I got told off when I was putting this talk together, and they said to me, you don't have a deck. So I made one slide. That's it. Better yet, I made the slide 10 minutes ago. Sometimes great game design is thinking on your feet and doing as much as you can with whatever you've got on hand. Oh, isn't that lovely? Right, okay, so I've come here to give a talk. It's 4C. 4C is fantastic. It's an excuse for everyone to get together. We learn, we trade, we get lots of information, we make new friends. It's absolutely wonderful. And the first time I talked at 4C was in Kiev, and I gave what I thought was a pretty good talk. I enjoyed giving it. It wasn't the best talk. Apparently that was Miloš's talk. And therefore I wasn't invited to St. Petersburg to talk there. He's now here to talk again, and I'm here. So now this is a battle to the death. Just so we're clear. And I need to win. And I still work for Wargaming. All reasonable thoughts. And I thought, well, as I'm coming here and I'm going to talk, why don't I try and talk about something that means a lot, matters a lot, and has some sort of influence? So I'm actually giving a workshop about designer strengths happening tomorrow. You can come along for that. There's only 20 spaces. If you're 21, you can't come in. But the talk is something very dear to my heart, and it's about how Wargaming, the company, the people, the games, saved my gaming soul. So, the bar's set quite low. What I've got, very unusually, is I've got some cards. I don't usually talk with cards, but I've got that because on the back of the cards, there are numbered bits of things that I've picked up in gaming. They come from a big document I've got. There's actually 256 of them, but I rolled dice to decide which we're going to go on here. I did this because if you don't like the talk, at least there's some takeaway points. So that's not too bad. The talk itself is a bit of a little ride. Now, to be fair, about halfway through, it's a little sad. But stay with me, it's got a great ending. So far, so good? Right, so who am I? I'm Paul Barnett. I've been making games for 20-something years. I've made them on my own. I've made them with big companies. I've made them in different countries. Some have been gloriously successful. Some have been terrible. Some I really liked working on, and nobody bought them. Others I couldn't care about, and they keep selling. I've been very happy. I've been very sad. And it's that I want to talk about, and where I am, and why I'm at Wargaming, and why I love Wargaming. So here we go. Oh, turn over the card. Number 22. 22. I believe everybody has a golden age of gaming. This is a moment when they weren't paying attention and suddenly they decided they liked a game. For some people, it was early on in their life. For my mother, the golden age of gaming has come in the golden years. She loves Farmville. Why don't I make games like that? It has a cow. She can send me a cow. She talks about them exactly the way I used to talk about games when I was 7. I think it might be punishment. But here's a thought for you. I think there's a piece of hardware you like, and you feel very warm about it. And I think there's a game you really like, and you feel very warm about it. And I think it's a very good idea for all designers and game makers to think about their golden age hardware and their golden age game. And I think it's a really good icebreaker conversation you can have with someone about their golden age game and their golden age hardware. And for some people, it's mobile games and Clash of Clans right now. For other people, it's things you've never even heard of. Thankfully for me, I like the Spectrum computer, and it turns out the only other place it was popular, Wargaming. Fantastic. So there you go, thing to learn. I was a gamer before I ever made games. I was a gamer at a very early age. According to my mother, I've always been a gamer. I was always doing this. It comes as no surprise to her that this is what I do for a living, other than she thought it would never make any money, and she was right for 17 years. It's from the 1970s, or as my daughter calls it, the 1970s. That's a terrible thought. It's the 1900s, 70s, there's the 1700s, the 1800s, and the 1900s, Dad. I banished her to a room. I have a lot of weaknesses. I came from poverty. I'm colorblind, which makes playing tanks really hard because our maps are red and green on brown. Thank you for that. We have a colorblind mode, but only half of it works. Thank you for that. I'm also asthmatic. I'm also dyslexic, can't read very well. I'm also deaf at the top third of hearing, which I only discovered in my late 30s when my son failed a hearing test when he was a little boy. I took the same hearing test, I also failed it. So it turns out all those times I was ignoring people, I just couldn't hear you. And all that music I thought was terrible, it is. Stay with me. Back then, because we had no money, I played a lot of dice games, card games, board games. I played games in streets that didn't involve running too hard. I'm asthmatic. Played a lot with my aunties and uncles, my grandmas, granddads. We used to get games from the second-hand store, and because I couldn't read the instructions, I used to make them up. I also used to take all the pieces from different games, put them together and invent games. And I used to invent card games. I got into role-playing games, not because they're brilliant, though they are, but because they're cheap. You could steal a dice from Monopoly, pencil, paper, done. From that, I could go to the stars, to the bottom of the earth, and go to alternate universes. I couldn't write the adventures out because I could barely spell, but that's not the point. And from that, I discovered arcade games. Now, I know a lot of people today talk about monetization and mobile and that aggressive pinch and crunch. There was nothing like arcade games. That was coin drop. The entire logic was to eat money, kill you as fast as possible. And when you're poor, like I was, the only answer was to loiter in arcades, constantly hitting rejection buttons to see if coins would come out, and then only spending it on a game you knew you could last a long time. I talked to Mark Cerny, he made Marble Madness, and he told me all about this coin drop logic. Back then, they had to burn the games onto chips, and that was the only time they could see if it worked. And then they just had a stopwatch. Put the game in an arcade, stopwatch, to see how long it took for the person to put more money in. If it failed, didn't burn any more chips. So let's not get too carried away about how mean it is these days. From that, I got a computer, Spectrum, fantastic. And then I got a console, they're terrible. And then I got a computer again, Atari ST, fantastic. And from that, PCs and great. I was also reading a lot of cartoons. Well, watched cartoons and I read comics. I read comics because there's not a lot of words and lots of pictures. And cartoons, because you could make stuff up, it was great. That was me as a gamer, and a couple of things are important. One, I knew my gamer people. I could talk to them about it passionately. I could go back in time just thinking about it. I would share views. I knew everything about the industry. I was really, really happy. Gaming was fantastic. It was like a lifeblood. I had a gamer family, and they made me feel welcome. We still fought. If you like the Commodore 64, you're just wrong today. But we also loved gaming. It was absolutely great. And of course, when that happens, and I was going to talk about it, I had to go back in time, and I remembered a couple of things. First, Ubisoft, other than teaching Victor to speak with a Quebecois accent, joke for one person, it's a true story, by the way, Ubisoft have this thing called rational game design. You don't need to know what it is, but it has a thing in it called flow, which actually I'm a big fan of. And this concept of flow is that it's this sort of up and down that you go through as you're playing a game. And I like this idea of flow. And they have this whole concept that if a game becomes predictable or doesn't have anything new or isn't inspiring you, the flow can get low and can move into boredom. And if instead the flow gets very hypertension because you've got skill, new things you have to discover, things you don't know about, it can get you into, fear and unhappiness. Well, I believed I had gamer flow. I knew when I was in flow talking about games, and I was always happy when I was doing it, which is why I never liked talking about it to people who didn't like games, because then I would go into boredom. Or people who are game makers, they put me into fear. And then I realized when I thought back about games that my perception of my gamer life is more powerful than my memory. Turns out I don't remember anything, not correctly. Everything's a different color and a different shape. People that I'm convinced are in the room aren't. Times and dates I thought were true aren't. But my perception's really strong. And then my nostalgia turned out to be really strong, way stronger than my knowledge. I would go off and buy games from my childhood, convinced they were this big. convinced they had pieces like this, and they would turn up. And they were made of crappy cardboard, and they looked terrible, and they played really bad. And that's really interesting, because as you go through your golden age of gaming, your head is being filled of these things, but they're really nostalgia, and they're really perception. That doesn't mean there's not great things in there, it just means you have to be careful about them. So that meant I had to move on and fix this problem, because I couldn't be a gamer, I need to be a game maker. Ooh, number 16. Ooh, this is where I wrote down what I thought we're currently arguing about as game makers. And so the one I think that is worth looking at is the fight between together versus alone, which at the moment is being won by together. Single-player games are, not in vogue. And then, is it for everyone, or is it just for you? I think that's an interesting battleground. Number 16. Anyway, moving on, game maker. I was a game maker really early on. Paper, glue, pen. Make games all over the place. RPG games, all that. And then I went and found bulletin board door programs. Really old stuff that you don't care about. And from that, I learned scripting. And from that, I then learned how to make proper games, allegedly. And then I went and made a game that went on the World Wide Web, which grew up to be the internet. And that did very well. And I thought about what I was like back then. And I was very focused. And I was happy and thoughtful. I moved between the two. I had an awful lot of direction. I was damn sure I was going to make a game. And I had a target. Get my game out and get people to play it and then pray they liked it. I wasn't very good at thinking about the money. And I wasn't very good about future thinking. I also wasn't very good about my time. Lots of stuff I did then was very inefficient. Still is at places. I did discover then with design a couple of things that I think are important. That's where I learned that design that is the design I like is design that I put in and works. It's no other design. If it's not in the game and it doesn't work, I don't care what it is, it's not design. It's just something written down somewhere. It's also where I discovered that design isn't certain, which is terrifying as a designer. Because you want to deal in certainty. And yet here you are coming up with a design, putting it in a game, and then players hate it. Or you put a design into a game and they like the wrong thing. Or they do something weird with it. And you look at them and go, why are you doing that? It's not supposed to do that. So, design isn't certain. Careful about design. I also discovered there is no such thing as giggle hertz. None at all. And there is no fun matrix. If there were, we could just use data and theory to fix everything. So that was my game maker period. Number 4. Ooh, gosh, this is me trying to write theory. Players' use of time, power, skill, story, or triggers to gain more time, power, skill, story, or triggers is the essence of progression. That's very deep. I wonder if it's true. Might be true. So there I was a game maker and I hit a lot of frustrations. I'll tell you what the frustrations were. Tech improvements would turn up and people would pretend that they were design improvements, and they weren't. But everyone told us they were. I'll give you a very basic example. When we moved from 2D to 3D. By moving to 3D, clearly all this new design would happen. But it didn't. It was just the same thing. In some cases, it went backwards. Design got worse with technical improvements. Madness. I was confused at this part in my life. I was a bit lost. I was very tired. I remember being very tired back then. I was a little afraid. Why? Because these technological improvements had changed the landscape of the games I was making. Budgets, staff, content, publishing, developers, platform, payment models, .com boom and bust. Ouch. It was a very dangerous time to be an independent game maker. If you weren't careful, you were going to get killed. So as a result, I moved house again. At this point, this is my 11th house move, but I moved house and tried to solve my problems. Number 32. Ooh. At its worst, game design can be obvious, needlessly complex, or incomprehensible. Sometimes it's all three. That happens to me a lot. Why did I have the frustrations? I needed to move on. I moved on and I went for bigness. Now, if you're going to go for bigness, there are only two ways to do it. You can go and find money off people, believe in what you're doing, risk everything. The wargaming method. It's true. It's a good method. Or you can go work for bigness, which means go work for big companies and do it that way. I decided to go work for bigness. What did I discover? Well, bigness gave me all the things I was worried about. Budget, planning, headcount, IP, platforms, delivery, payment models. But bigness came with tons and tons of problems. Thank you very much. The biggest problem with bigness is that ideas were hard. They would get altered, changed, attached to other ideas, diluted, unfocused, unfinished. You'd have to argue with people who were idiots all the time. And then they'd still say no. The cult of internet turned up, which made being a game maker really, really hard. It was already really hard. We already didn't get any money and no one liked us, but now the internet hated us. Worse, the internet would hate you even if you were trying to tell them the honest answer truthfully with a good heart. Warhol was wrong. It's not famous for 15 minutes, it's famous for 15 megabytes. And the time to Hitler was a time to Hitler where you used to be on forums and you would post something and then you could count the amount of posts before someone would claim you were Hitler. And over the period of time, the time to Hitler got less and less. It wasn't 50 posts. It was suddenly 25 posts, then 10. And this was very bad, but this has been replaced in the modern era with memes. Now you just get made into a meme. And the timing's got really bad on memes. It's now a server ping. This is very, very distressing if you're just trying to make games. Never mind the fact that if you're working with bigness, there's lots of people I work with. It's not just me. It's not just, why are you doxing me and being mean to my family? So that was really hard. And then the will of the internet. Executives would turn up with the will of the internet in their heads. This is what players want. This is what I've seen. This is what Twitter is trending. And the problem with the will of the internet is the internet doesn't know what it actually wills. And sometimes you give it what it wants and it still hates you. Very frustrating. I was still very focused, but I was unhappy and confused. I was thinking about the future and I was thinking about my time. I can't make games forever. I realized I had to move on if I was going to solve the problems, which leads to number 11, design theory. Design theory is about why, how. It's usually based on the past. Design is doing actual work. There could be an agenda in that point. So, I got 2 sets of reflections before I get to the wargaming bit where I'll be very happy. Reflection number 1, big data arrived, game theory arrived. I don't mind big data, but what I've learned about big data is it knows absolutely everything and can answer almost nothing. You have to know how to use it, otherwise it's a terrifying beast. I don't mind theory, but you've got to be careful with theory. For instance, you could go, if you want to be a band and really popular in the 1960s, there should be 4 of you from Liverpool with guitars named after insects. And you go, what about the Crickets? And you go, well, they had first mover advantage, but they weren't from Liverpool. Dave Clark 5, clues in the name, there's 5 of them. That's what you got to be careful about. People come and ask me for jobs now. Young people. They're as young as my son. I can only tell 3 ages. My age, my son's age, my mum's age. Everyone else, no idea. But I do know that the kids that come and ask for jobs, I have food in my kitchen older than these kids. I have tins of Spam older than the children coming to ask me for jobs. And they've all got PhDs and MBAs and all masters and all this crazy stuff. And here's what I've decided. They have been educated for jobs we don't have, to work on platforms we've yet to invent, to solve problems we don't know we're going to run into. Very frustrating. And prediction. I was at EA for a long time. EA is a meat grinder. EA is meat eating. It is a very hard place to be at for a long time. And they spend a lot of money trying to figure out what the answer is. And what I learned is that for all the money, for all the data, for all the knowledge, for all the consultants, we can't predict very well. We can't predict where we're going. We can't predict what's going to happen. We can't predict where the winners are. We're just not very good at it. And this was all happening in bigness, and it was making me upset. Oh, other side. Number 14. There's a young designer, I don't know whether he's in the room, but he got sent over from Minsk, and he's learning design off me this week. And he's very, very forceful. For people who don't know, the Minskites are very forceful on everything. They believe in confrontation. It's very healthy for them. And I like people with strong opinions. And the question I asked him, and I wrote it down, is, that's a very strong opinion. Whose is it? Where'd you get it from? I mean, I know you've got it, and I know you want to beat me up about it, and I know you want to argue with me, but where's it come from? And this caught him cold. He'd never thought about that. But it's a good piece of thinking for a designer to do. Spend some time thinking about where your opinions are coming from and where you got them. Okay, reflections, last bit. Critics. I'm on the giant bomb every now and then. I talk to Jeff Gerstmann, who I like very much. Gary Penn was my favorite critic when I was a little kid. Critics at bigness drove me crazy because they were both professional and amateur, and I realized that they were playing quickly, often arrogantly, with a lot of judgment, but not a lot of wisdom and not a lot of insight. And that's very dangerous because they were fueling the internet will. That I'd been grown up where we wanted high def and hi-fi, photorealism, physics, water effects, bigger televisions, better sound, 5:1 surround, 6:1 surround, 27:1 surround. My children don't want that. They want low def and Wi-Fi. And that was blasting the game market to pieces. And then the last bit that really drove it home to me is commercial games sometimes can be art. Sometimes. But they have to be commercial. They've got to bring the money in. Games that are trying to be art are almost never commercial. And I think that that was really important. So there I was, not feeling very happy. Oh, I should do that one. The one piece of theory I believe in, I stole it. Always steal things, that's wisdom. With fun, I think I agree with this idea. There's hard fun and soft fun. They're the only two types of fun I think you can experience in a game. Soft fun anyone can get regardless of attitude, application, controller, skill, dedication. Lots of games have soft fun. Match 3s have a lot of soft fun. Soft fun is very good. Makes us very happy. Then there's hard fun. Hard fun you can only get if you actually put time, effort, and energy in some form of commitment. I think a designer understanding hard and soft fun is one of the fundamentals of design. So there you are. The industry I was working was slow. Ideas were getting diluted. There was a lack of focus. It was business over joy, which I understand. They have a share price. There was a lot of planning. I remember a lot of planning. Restructuring. We were always restructuring. And after we restructured, we would plan to have another restructure. We used process a lot. Big companies use process. They use process and delay when they lack confidence. If you're not sure how they're spending your money, force them into process and delay. That'll at least slow down them wasting money. And then the 3 truths of bigness. If you wanted it quick, it would take us forever. If we agreed we were going to do it cheaply, it would end up costing a fortune. And because it was a business-wide initiative that we can all be part of, it would be in secret meetings and folders and documents that we didn't share with anyone, which was just nuts. I wasn't moving house. 23 house moves, and I wasn't moving house for the first time ever. In fact, I bought a house, which was fatal. But I had all these new problems. Ooh. I had to go and see, I was working in the office of the chief creative officer at EA at the time, and I had to go and meet a lot of designers, and there was one key thing that I learned, that if we were going to keep designers, but there was a problem with them, I would say to their manager, get your designer to think about the money. It's not sexy, it doesn't make the designer happy, but it keeps the designer honest. The designer has to think about money, they become better designers. 34. So that led me to a problem. I could stay where I was. I certainly was getting paid a lot of money. I was working, I was in California, but I wasn't playing very many games. And I wasn't enjoying the conversations. And I was quite miserable. My reality needs imagination, and my imagination needs reality, a bit like a canvas needs paint. And I'd done some interesting things and some terrible things and some things that had worked. And I remembered a phrase a friend of mine said, those diamond moments, they were just very patient bits of coal. Just waited enough. And I'd got fed up of compelling arguments that were ultimately stupid. If something's stupid, who cares if it's compellingly said? It's still stupid. Or to put another way, if it isn't worth doing it, it isn't worth doing it well. And that's where I was in my time in the OCCO. It was madness. I needed a challenge, and I needed to do something else. And it was my wife, wherever she is, there she is, who came up with the answer. I was in California and a little bit unhappy, and she said, what you need to do is go work on a game you love. And I ranted and railed. I said, there are no games. They're all terrible. All gaming landscape is dead to me. There hasn't been anything good since something nostalgic that doesn't exist anymore. It's soulless mobile. It's... and off I went. It could have been a talk. And after I'd finished and I'd said all this, she calmly handed me a cup of coffee and she said, well, it's Sunday afternoon, you're in your dressing gown, and you're sitting down playing that bloody tank game again, which you've been playing obsessively for 2 years. And I went, yes, but this isn't. She's a very smart lady. I thought about it, and I was like, that's true, I have been playing the hell out of World of Tanks. Why have I never come out of it? Now, I'd met Victor years before, because they used to have these lunatic parties at E3, and I don't go to parties, but a friend of mine was a big party animal, and somehow he got to a party, and somehow they got me in, and somehow I ended up in some place with Victor, and it was all mad. I don't really remember much of it. It was just madness. It was just madness swirling around somehow. And God bless Victor, too many people come up to him to talk to him. So he had some sort of filtering system. And so I ended up in front of him, and someone had said, this is Paul, he plays tanks. And Victor smacked me on my back really hard, like almost grabbed hold of me, pulled me across, sat me down at a laptop, lit up a cigarette, said, play. I was like, what? Play. You fucking play now. Okay. So I was like, oh, right. So you come to meet Victor, you get to play tanks. That's not a bad deal. So there I was playing tanks. I was playing my beloved KV-1. And I played my tanks, and he's watched. And at that point, Victor ignored every other person around there. There's all these other people trying to see him. And he was just sitting behind me, fucking cigarette, watching. And I played 3 games. And then the guy who'd brought me over, the guy who'd done the introduction, because Victor didn't talk to me about it, he just went over to this guy and smacked him. And he went, you can play. And that was it. That was my first meeting with Victor. And I didn't see him again for 2 years. True story. So there I was thinking, well, how can I do that? So I went and talked to all the people who love me and care for me, with the exception of my wife, who had said you should play on tanks. And every single one of them said exactly the same thing. Don't go to Wargaming. And I mean across the board. I couldn't find anyone who was like, oh yeah, that's the right place to go. They all said no. And I was like, you're all saying, why are you all saying no? And when an awful lot of people were saying no, and I got very confused about it, because I was like, well, there must be something they know that I don't know. And the more that I hunted around and tried to figure it out, the more I came to the conclusion is that they didn't know anything. They were just making a judgment somehow, probably on the parties, I guess. And so instead, I went through the process of going, no, I do. I want to go see if I can work on tanks. And that moment changed everything. Number 43, work with great people. They will make you better. if you work 10 years with average people, I'm sure you'll have a good time. If you work 1 year with a genius, you might not have a good time, but you'll learn loads. Don't stay with people who are bad to you either, but work with good people. Find them, hang out with them. It's important. It makes you better. So I then put a list together, and I decided that I wanted to work on what I loved. And lub lub tanky. Oh, yes. Me and the tanks. We're strong. I wanted happiness now. Not happiness in 5 years, not when shares vested, not potentially going and working on another project for 3 years. I wanted happiness now. I wanted to want to go to work. I wanted challenges. I wanted to be able to utilize the strong skill set I had. I'm not afraid of hard work, but I needed to go find it. I also wanted to prove that I could do it, which is odd, because wargaming is quite a tricksy thing to understand if you're a Westerner. You feel like you could understand it from a distance, but that's just not true. It gets more complicated the closer you get, and you learn more things, the more time you pay to it. And the more I thought about it, and the more I tried to distill what this moment was, I decided it was a moment of honesty. It required me to be honest about what I wanted as a game designer, what I wanted as a person, what I wanted to do with my time on the planet, and what I was willing to give up that everyone was telling me not to give up. Don't leave California. Don't leave the Bay Area. Don't give up your share options. Don't give up the office of the Chief Creative Officer. You're the Senior Creative Director. What are you talking about? Don't go work for Wargaming. Don't. And the funny thing is, there's a company that heard that. It was Wargaming. People don't know from outside of Wargaming the hard road they went down, the decisions they had to make, the amount of no they had to accept, the amount of disbelief that they were faced with. Everyone told them no. Everyone said it couldn't be done. Everyone said they were wasting their time. Just like they did when I was making my first games. Just like I got when I was a gamer, but I was dyslexic and I couldn't go to school and I couldn't get any exams. If you'd listened to these people, you wouldn't have got anywhere. And so, honesty. Honesty with me, and then learning the honesty within Wargaming. To go up to them and say, I haven't got a silver bullet solution. I'm not a magical West Coast solve. I don't know better than you. I love tanks. Love to make tanks better. Super important. Big games. The more control you want over a design feature, the smaller the design feature will have to be. Do you know what I'm trying to get? I'm trying to get colorblind mode to work on the targeting reticle. Igor laughing. That's all. We've got a button in tanks that you click that says, I'm colorblind. And when you do, about 20% of the game actually becomes colorblind happy. And the rest of it, nothing. Nothing. So that's the one thing I obsess over. I tell him every day. I had to learn the CIS way. CIS is like the collective for Belarus, Russia, and all that. The CIS way, if you're not from Belarus and Russia, it's like trying to learn Kung Fu. Like, it's like you go, I'm here to learn the CIS way. And the next thing you know, you're covered in bruises. You're very tired. And then they just make you do the same thing over again. You go, it doesn't seem to make any sense. But as you learn that Kung Fu, as you learn that CIS way, you learn loads of things. You learn to understand who they are. You learn to understand what they're doing. You learn to understand what they believe in. You start sharing. You start building respect for them. One of the things I admire about my Russian colleagues and my Belarusian colleagues is they're not impressed with what you did in the past. They like what you do now. That's really good. But the resume, no. Very not American, but, you know, as long as you're willing to do it. You can make a difference. What a lovely idea. You can go to a company, a big company, and make a difference. That was really important, because I was in a lot of planning meetings. I wasn't making a difference. That the company has hope. Lots of the big companies don't have hope. It's a bit weird, isn't it? The people are almost uniformly cool, because they haven't been infected with that madness that people get. The idea of wargaming is really cool. that they were in CIS making a game. It's incredibly hard to make a game anywhere in the world where you've got venture capitalists and people who've got server farms and people who want to invest and people who can see the market. Can you imagine making it in Belarus? I'm not kidding. The leadership's also cool. And the vision, I was very impressed with the vision. One thing, this is a truism. The CEO of EA, and I lived through 3, each one of them visited my studio once, and never once did somebody in my studio go, the CEO's coming. Awesome. I'm so incredibly happy about that. Do you think I can talk to them? Can I meet them? Never happened. Happens all the time with Victor. And it's true, and it's honest, and it's weird, and I'm not used to it. But so I tried to distill what that does, and I decided it was trust. I had to trust that the company would be fair with me. And they had to trust that I wasn't just turn up and be a dick. That I wasn't just going to say, you're doing it wrong. You need to put all these policies in place. The problem with your team is that everyone is weak and no one knows how to do stuff and your work practices are no good and you're behind the times. Oh yeah? Then why do we have a phenomenon? Why has it dominated the planet? Why has no one else got close to it? What, luck? Please. Careful. Trust. Number 56. Common sense design is not that common. I could have just stopped it there, but I realized that common sense also changes. I lived through a huge common sense pivot in design, and it was absolutely painful. Common sense was you built a game, you put it in a box, and you sold it. And that common sense was demolished. Demolished by mobile and free-to-play. So common sense is important, we should look for it, but common sense also has to be upgraded. Don't do that, you're doomed. Oh. Wow, we're nearly there. We're nearly there. I'm at Wargaming because I once again enjoy the business. I enjoy the business of making games. I hadn't given talks until I came back to Wargaming. I'd been off the talking circuit for 5 years because it was driving me crazy. I'm in meetings with people now and they have ideas and a desire and an attention to try and make things better and they want to learn and they want to share. And do you know what? They want to believe. The one thing that I enjoy is I talk to people at Wargaming and they turn around and they go, you are very, very positive about tanks. And I go, yeah, I am very positive about tanks. I think it is deeply underexploited and has an awful lot still to give. Because they've been at the coalface for so long, haven't quite, let's see that verse. So, but then when I wake them up, when they get that enthusiasm, man, they knock down doors, they get features, they do great stuff. Sharing, learning, and teaching. I've learned a lot. Очень хорошо. Vladimir gave me this, by the way, which was a very, very nice thing. He'd come over to visit us in Prague, and he was talking about servers and technology, and then somebody stole his handkerchief. No, not Putin. No. Good check there. Good clarity. So I learned to enjoy the making of the game. It's very unusual. I talk to designers. Making games is nothing like playing games. It's sort of like watching a magic trick and then having to perform a magic trick. And for a lot of designers, this act of stepping behind the curtain ruins games. And you can't play them anymore because all you see is the numbers. But that's not true with tanks. I continue to enjoy it, which is lovely. And I love Wargaming not because of the company it is. I love Wargaming because of where it came from and how it got here and the company it is so desperately trying to be. It's a better company than it was 2 years ago. It's a better company than it was a year ago. It's a better company than it was 2 months ago. That's a great vector to be on. And when I distilled all that down, I decided it was a love affair. I love tanks. I love Wargaming. And they seem to love me. So it's all working out well. I love our players, even our fierce ones. Honesty, trust, love. Not bad things to get from a company. Number 19, learn how you take in information. Some people take it in through reading, some people from a presentation, some people need to listen to things, some people need to do things, some people need to experience it multiple times. How do you take in information? Figure it out. When you've figured out the best way of taking in information, take information in that way. Save you a lot of time. I don't read books. It's not because I'm a Luddite, it's because I'm dyslexic, and when I try to read them, the words move and I don't understand them. So I take my information in a different way. Once you figure out how you take in information, then figure out how you pass on information. I can write you a document. You'll have a lot of fun. It won't make any sense. I'm told my documents are much better if you've heard me speaking. And if you say it in my voice, it makes more sense. But if you just read it cold, it's just gibberish. And the reason you need to know how you take in information and you broadcast is because you need to know how the people you're talking to take in information and how they broadcast. If you want to make the connections, figure out how to do it. Oh, and by the way, if they've got a golden age, figure out what it is. If they're obsessed with Zelda, then point out how your game is kind of like Zelda. Top tip. Wargaming, I was talking to a friend of mine. I'm off to Ubisoft. I'm giving a talk up in Quebec City. And I put together the outline of what I'm talking about. I sent it off to the guy, and he wrote back, and he highlighted it, and he said, there's some really strange stuff in here. I said, oh, I don't know. So I just thought I'd tell you some of the things I've written down. I like Wargaming because they're still interested in ideas rather than target markets. I mean, they understand target markets. We've got to pay attention to target markets, but they're still excited by ideas. I can't get any idea when I was at EA. It was horrible. Access to leadership. No matter how crazy EA was, access to leadership was almost impossible. Access to leadership Wargaming is fantastic. The boss is right here. There's room to grow. The company was self-started. It did a lot of really impressive things, but it wants to grow. There's room to grow. That's a great reason to be here. Warm loyalty and support. At EA, you're allowed to make half of a mistake. Then they rip your arms off. And that's a certain way of doing business. It's not the best way of doing business. Wargaming has just got a lot of warm loyalty and support. It still means we make mistakes. It still means we're a little clumsy at times. Sometimes we invest things we shouldn't. But it doesn't become a hanging offense. Will to win. That's much better than hitting your quarterly business target. It's much better than worrying about the share price. I like winning. In Wargaming, we squabble and fight and argue. And some people don't like other people and say they smell. And sometimes we talk about how they've stolen something off us and we're not very happy about it. But that's because we're more like a family than a company. And families squabble. They also stick together. And if you come at us from the outside, we draw ranks. It's interesting. I'm a big fan. And it put me back into a flow. Remember I talked about game flow? A flow of game making. And I'm back into a game making flow. And then I looked around and realized that at Wargaming, what I've discovered is my gaming family. I've gone all the way back to my childhood. I talk passionately and warmly and argue and fight, just like I did when I was first a gamer. But now I get to do it at Wargaming on my favorite game that I still play the hell out of. And therefore, the short answer, gaming, my soul, it was saved by Wargaming, for which I'm eternally thankful. Thank you very much. I can do it if you want. Apparently I have to answer questions. My God, no one told me that was in the equation. All right. I can answer questions if you want. Does that mean they have microphones? That's why the people with microphones were looking at me like I was a liar. Rats! One of the things that happens in gaming is they always give you more work. If you complete your milestone, they'll just give you more. Delay your milestone and lie. No, sorry. Thought I was back at EA.
Has anyone got any questions? Just stick your hand up. I'll bring the mic over. No? No questions? We made him walk all the way up there on his own. Aww.
Go to more talks. Thank you very much.